big question I've always had since reading Fire and Blood for the first time, and an issue I know many fans have also questioned since House of the Dragon Season 1, is what would have actually have happened to Aegon in a situation where Rhaenyra peacefully took the throne, uncontested, where there was no push by Alicent and Otto upon the death of Viserys to place Aegon on the throne, if there was no king-making by Criston Cole. Was Otto Hightower's warning to Alicent that Rhaenyra would kill not just Aegon but all of her children actually come to pass? Well, it turns out it's a much harder question than I first envisioned when I started to work on this video. And while the answer tends to be the same for both the book and the show, there's some very key differences that change how we can view it, due to how fundamentally different the characters are in each medium. What makes this so hard to answer is the butterfly effect of Aegon not pushing his claim to the throne. So much changes, it creates an unrecognisable situation. It's kinda like saying, what would happen if Rhaegar didn't kidnap Lyanna Stark, thus starting Robert's rebellion? The world we are talking about is vastly different, making this one change really impact how Targaryen history as a whole pans out, due to the falling dominoes it causes. First, we need to establish what is likely even going to happen to Aegon and the rest of the Greens should Rhaenyra peacefully take the throne. The dance was a war unlike any other fought in the long history of the Seven Kingdoms. Though armies marched and met in savage battles, much of the slaughter took place on the waters and, especially, in the air, as dragon fought dragon with tooth and claw and flame. It was a war marked by stealth, murder and betrayal as well, and fought in the shadows and stairwells, council chambers and castle yards, with knives and lies and poison. The writings of Archmaester Gildane, Fire and Blood, the dying of the dragons, the blacks and the greens. Probably the most controversial part of that I see argued about the most when it comes to House of the Dragon is Otto Hightower's claim to Alicent that Rhaenyra coming to the throne would mean death for Alicent's children. In the book as well, Alicent also does hold this belief that should Rhaenyra come to the throne, her children's lives would be forfeit. This may seem like a bold claim, especially in the show with the context of the friendship between Rhaenyra and Alicent. But I do believe, even if you are the most die-hard Rhaenyra supporter, you cannot deny on a fundamental level that Otto's assessment is objectively true. But this has nothing to do with what the character of Rhaenyra may or may not want to do. Even if Rhaenyra was completely against the deaths of her half-siblings and stepmother, even if she decreed no harm should come to them, what Rhaenyra wants in this case is beyond her control, realistically. Aegon, Aemond, Helaena, Daeron, Jaehaerys, Maelor. If a single descendant of Viserys and Alicent live, they pose a huge threat to Rhaenyra's claim and the claims of her descendants as well. Simply by existing, they would perpetually be a threat, even unknowingly and unwillingly. If not Rhaenyra herself, somebody would likely take action on her behalf. In a case of the book and the show, this would most likely be Daemon Targaryen, or another member of the Black Council. But given what we know of Daemon in the book and the show, he does fit this role. In House of the Dragon Season 2, we already have multiple instances where Daemon creatively interprets Rhaenyra's commands. While I was not a fan of how Rhaenyra was diminished and sanitized in terms of her responsibility with House of the Dragon's take on blood and cheese, it shows us exactly the kind of thing Daemon or another party could do in regards to Aegon. But there is a very clear reason why Otto knows Rhaenyra would have no choice in the matter, and why he knows, if not Rhaenyra personally, somebody from her faction would act on her behalf. Rhaenyra's claim will always be in doubt and always be at risk all the while any of her half-brothers live, even if they are peaceful and happy with her on the throne. The moment there is a disgruntled lord, or kingdom, or even a threat from a foreign power, Aegon, Aemond and Daeron, etc. become an easy banner for enemies to rally to. This is an issue that would span generations. Say Jacaerys takes the throne after his mother. The descendants of any of the Greens pose maybe even a bigger threat to Jace's rule due to the disconnect between the generations. The first Blackfyre Rebellion kind of shows us the risk of having a whole separate branch to your family with a claim to the throne. The Blackfyre Rebellion did not just happen overnight, and Daemon did have to be convinced by men acting against the crown to press his claim, the likes of Aegon Rivers. Thus why the bloodline of Viserys and Alicent will always be a risk to Rhaenyra and her descendants. So if we set that issue aside momentarily, Otto is objectively correct in his assumption about the fate of his grandchildren in a world where Rhaenyra is queen, and say this is never going to be a real issue. Remove the concept of Aegon being a threat just by being alive. Then what happens with Aegon? Because Rhaenyra cannot just ignore the fact there's a whole branch of Targaryens with as good and maybe even a better claim to the throne than her, sat in King's Landing, doing nothing. Having them there as part of the furniture is not an option for the same reasons we've already discussed. Dear brother, I had hoped you were dead. After you, you are the elder. I am pleased to know that you remember that. It would seem we are your prisoners. But do not think you will hold us long. My little lords will find me. If they search the seven hells, may perhaps. Rhaenyra Targaryen and Aegon II. Fire and blood, the dying of the dragons. Rhaenyra overthrown. The key issue House Targaryen has to overcome is the fact that if we ignore Maegor the Cruel, who married 6 times, but yet had no children, the marriage of Viserys and Alicent is the first time a king has remarried after the death of his first queen, thus effectively creating a second branch of the family via his second wife. But again, this is where Rhaenyra's gender comes into the debate. If Rhaenyra was born male, then Viserys would not have been creating a second branch of the family by marrying Alicent, given that the succession would have always been clear thanks to the widow's law. The existence of a second branch only becomes an issue due to the fact we have a woman who rightly or wrongly is inheriting over her brother. The fact that House Targaryen is effectively split in two is a direct result in the differing ideologies of the Blacks and the Greens when it comes to inheritance. So this huge second branch exists, and something needs to be done with them without killing them, which in itself is already an unlikely scenario. I think there is 3 likely outcomes. What I personally really hate when Alicent's children are called Hightowers by a lot of media outlets and some fans as well. It is the key to one of these solutions. At the end of the day, Aegon is just as much of a Targaryen as Rhaenyra. Aemond is just as much of a Targaryen as Daemon. It's akin to calling Robb and Sansa Stark Tullys because they take after Catelyn more than Ned. They are Starks, just like Alicent's children with Viserys are Targaryens. But maybe, in this situation, this Hightower connection could be leveraged. Sending Aegon far away to live somewhere like Oldtown does fit given his Hightower connection. If you have a whole Hightower descended branch of House Targaryen, you need to find a place for. Oldtown seems like a good fit, if it cannot be King's Landing. In the same manner, Rhaenyra marrying Laenor was supposed to mend the rift between House Targaryen and House Velaryon and fix the succession dispute between Baelor and Rhaenys from 92 AC, and later Viserys and Laenor from 101 AC. You could marry Jaehaerys or Jaehaera to the firstborn child of Jace and Baelor, thus joining the 2 branches as one and merging the claims to the throne. What this also does is reduce the risk of any of Aegon's descendants down the line, even hundreds of years later, trying to push their ancestral claim to the throne, with Aegon's claim becoming the rallying point for rebellion. Because House Targaryen is already effectively split into 2 branches, you could in theory make the Green branch of House Targaryen a cadet branch of the house. Basically, give them land, give them titles, and make them their own separate house. We see this with several houses throughout the lore. The Starks have cadet branches, with House Karstark originating as one. In the Iron Islands, there's several cadet branches of House Harlaw, and there even appears to be several cadet branches of House Baratheon, so it's not unheard of. But again, the main issue with this is, does it really fix the fundamental issue when it comes to the claims to the throne? The first Viserys intended his daughter Rhaenyra to follow him. Do you deny it? But as the king lay dying, the Lord Commander of the Kingsguard decided that it should be otherwise. Arianne Martell to Aerys Oakheart. A Feast for Crows, Chapter 13, The Soiled Knight. We also have the dragon problem we have to factor in. A huge reason about why the Dance of the Dragons was possible in the first place is with Rhaenys Targaryen marrying into House Velaryon and her children being allowed to bond and claim dragons, you create a second house with access to what is effectively a nuclear weapon. Initially with Laenor marrying Rhaenyra and Laena marrying Daemon, it does solve the issue for a while, and the match between Jace and Baela negates this to some degree. Then of course, we have Lucerys who would be marrying Rhaena, and Joffrey with an unknown bride. With the three of them all having dragons, it could easily lead to more Velaryons with their own dragons via their descendants, with this maybe even spreading beyond House Velaryon depending on how matches pan out. My point is, a second house having access to your super weapon is always going to cause problems at some point in the future. It's a trickle-down effect. Using Joffrey as an example, say he marries a woman from another house. They have a daughter who could be a dragon rider, who in turn marries into another house, who has a child who could again be a dragon rider, and so on. The number of houses now with access to dragons grows until so many houses have them, they are no longer the deterrent and power they once were. So unless there is much tighter controls on who is allowed a dragon, or it's limited to just the main Targaryen line, it's going to be an issue. So with a hypothetical situation where Rhaenyra becomes queen, and Aegon is not killed and happy to push his claim, you have to wonder what's going to happen with all the dragon riders in this second branch. You have Aegon and Helena's children, Aemond and Daeron, who are both unmarried, who given their ages would likely need to marry non-Targaryen wives. So given how many dragon riders the Greens have, you could quickly create a situation where in a couple of generations there could be 5 or 6 houses with potential access to dragons, which would cause absolute chaos. Aegon being sent to Old Town is a risky move, and also creating a cadet branch of House Targaryen for Aegon and his descendants really doesn't solve the problem in a meaningful way. I think Rhaenyra would likely keep him somewhere close to home in King's Landing, and I feel that even if Aegon publicly renounced his claim, there would always perhaps be a layer of mistrust there. In King's Landing, there would always be an eye on him, just in case. The issue we also have with the marriage pacts that already exist in the original timeline is they are formed simply because of the threat of the Greens were to Rhaenyra. With Jace and Luke still be marrying Baela and Rhaena, the only way I can see to stop the threat Aegon and his branch of the family is to Rhaenyra permanently with no risks of uprisings from their descendants is to go with Viserys' original intent that was shot down by Alicent and marry their children and grandchildren together. Theoretically, marrying Jace to Jaehaera merges the branches of the family and makes the most sense. Marrying Aemond and Daeron to Baela and Rhaena also solves some of the issues and would only really leave Lucerys, Jaehaerys, Maelor, Joffrey, and of course Rhaenyra's sons via Daemon, Aegon the Younger, and Viserys, whom individually have very strong claims to the throne as well. They are all loose ends. If you can't find some way to unify these loose ends, and you can't find some way to unify the branches, I see a situation like the Blackfyre rebellions playing out over and over, only this time with dragons. As I think some kind of Dance of the Dragons-like event is inevitable in an instance where Rhaenyra takes the throne uncontested, with the only possible way I see of it being stopped by merging the rival branches via Jace and Jaehaera, which in itself is problematic given the 9-year age gap between the two in the books. While the age gap in the books can be workable, it's not ideal. While a betrothal could happen, the year's wait till Jaehaera was reasonably old enough to consummate the marriage poses a serious risk of foul play from forces unknown. If you're exclusively talking about House of the Dragon and not the book, then the situation works even less. The whole reason the seemingly sensible idea of marrying Rhaenyra and Aegon never goes anywhere is the sheer age gap involved. But ultimately, there is a reason the end of the Dance of the Dragons results in the marriage of Aegon III and Jaehaera. Is the only logical thing to do that can bring both sides of the war together, merging the lines of the claimants. But even that ends in tragedy at the death of Jaehaera. But by that time, everyone else with a rival claim is dead, and thus the issue in itself is void. Honestly, this whole marriage pact situation between the two branches is a political headache, and I don't blame a dying man such as Viserys from not being able to comprehend it and manage it. There is no simple solution. This is why the question of what happens to Aegon and the Greens is so hard to answer, as it stacks butterfly effect upon butterfly effect. That is because the Dance of the Dragons is such a key defining point in the history of Westeros. Much like in the real world, with William the Conqueror invading England in 1066, or Alfred the Great's dream of a united England. Without it, history as we know it today would be utterly unrecognisable and take a different path completely. Thus, all we can do is speculate. Maybe Aegon moves to Old Town, or stays in King's Landing. Maybe he and Rhaenyra's children marry. Maybe not. What I feel I can comfortably say is this. Even if Aegon himself never tried to claim the throne, and Rhaenyra becomes queen, it's inevitable there'll be some kind of Dance of the Dragons-like civil war at some point, as no matter how you try and cut it, without merging the claims via marriage of their descendants, or wiping out Alicent's branch of House Targaryen, there would always be a banner for enemies to rally around. So while the real issue is in fact much more complicated than House the Dragon makes it seem, Otto is 100% correct when he warns Alicent Rhaenyra becoming queen results in her children's death. It may not be Rhaenyra who holds the blade, but someone in her camp would do it. We see this inevitable reality of the situation during Season 2 of House the Dragon. When Alicent tries to make peace with Rhaenyra, the only way peace happens is if her sons are dead. By this point in the war, not even Rhaenyra herself can argue it otherwise. I think this inevitability is much easier to see in Fire and Blood versus the show, because of how fundamentally different the relationships between the characters are. You don't have this close friendship and bond between Alicent and Rhaenyra in the books that clouds Alicent's view of the reality of Rhaenyra's position. Part of the game being played in Fire and Blood is from the moment of Aegon's birth. All the players of the game know exactly the path this is going to go down. Fire and Blood.